The radius is a long bone that makes up the lateral part of the forearm. Being a long bone, it has a proximal end and a distal end. So here at the proximal end, we have this rounded spherical piece of bone that's called the head of the radius. And the head of the radius is what articulates with the capitulum on the humerus. So that forms part of the elbow joint there. So a little bit distally to the head of the radius is this large roughened patch right here. You can see it a little bit better if I turn it to the side. Kind of projects upward from the radius. This is called the radial tuberosity, and the radial tuberosity is the point where the biceps brachii, which is the large muscle that's on the anterior part of your arm, attaches to the radius. And so what this does is that when the biceps muscle flexes, or when the biceps muscle contracts, rather, it flexes the forearm when it contracts. And so that's where the biceps brachii muscle actually attaches to move the forearm. So that's the proximal end of the radius over here. If we flip it over and take a look at the distal end of the radius, we see that the distal end, which essentially sits at the wrist joint, is a little bit more triangular in its shape. And as I mentioned, this forms part of the wrist joint at the distal end of the radius. There's a very sharp little point right here at the tip of the distal end that's called the styloid process. So that is the radius.